Before we begin our journey into the ancient world, let me ask you a simple question. How does an entire civilization seem to appear almost out of nowhere? One moment, the plains of southern Mesopotamia were home to quiet farming villages. Then, within what seems like the blink of an eye in history, enormous cities appeared. Monumental temples reached toward the sky. Writing emerged for the first time. Mathematics, organized government, and remarkable engineering transformed human society forever. Who were the people behind these extraordinary achievements? Did the Sumerians truly appear suddenly, as a history sometimes seems to suggest? Or is there a much longer story hidden beneath thousands of years of forgotten settlements and buried ruins? In this video, we will carefully follow the evidence left behind by archaeologists, historians, and ancient texts. Together, we will explore the world before the Sumerians, trace the rise of the first cities, examine the mystery of their unique language, separate popular myths from historical evidence, and discover what modern research tells us about one of humanity's greatest civilizations. So dim the lights, get comfortable, and let the rivers of ancient Mesopotamia carry you gently back more than 5,000 years to a world where one of history's greatest mysteries was just beginning. For thousands of years, the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were home to quiet farming villages. Families planted wheat and barley, raised sheep and goats, and built simple homes from mud bricks shaped by hand. Life followed the rhythm of the seasons. The rivers flooded, crops grew, and generations lived and died without leaving behind written records. It was a world that changed slowly, almost imperceptibly, over countless centuries. Then something remarkable happened. Around 5,000 years ago, southern Mesopotamia witnessed the rise of cities, unlike anything the world had ever seen. Towering temples dominated the skyline. Thousands of people lived within organized communities. Skilled craftsmen produced beautiful pottery, jewelry, and tools. Merchants traveled long distances carrying goods across deserts and rivers. Priests, administrators, and workers all played their part in a society that had become astonishingly complex. The people responsible for this extraordinary transformation became known as the Sumerians. They built cities such as Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Lagash, and Nippur. They developed one of the world's earliest writing systems, established sophisticated systems of government, and laid the foundations for mathematics, law, astronomy, and literature. Their achievements would influence civilizations for thousands of years. Because so much appeared to happen within a relatively short period, the Sumerians have fascinated historians, archaeologists, and curious minds for generations. How could a civilization become so advanced so quickly? Where did these people come from? Why was their language unlike that of their neighbors? These questions continue to inspire debate even today. The truth, however, is rarely as simple as it first appears. Civilizations do not usually emerge overnight. Like mighty rivers, they are fed by countless smaller streams flowing together over many generations. Every invention has a beginning. Every city has a history before its walls were built. Every civilization stands upon the lives of those who came before it. If we hope to understand the Sumerians, we cannot begin with their magnificent cities or their famous kings. Instead, we must travel even further into the past, to a time before writing, before great temples, and before the first cities rose above the plains of Mesopotamia. Our search for the origins of the Sumerians begins not with the civilization itself, but with the quiet villages that came long before it. Because sometimes the greatest mysteries are solved not by looking at where history begins, but by looking at what came before. And so, let us journey back several thousand years to discover the forgotten world that prepared the way for one of humanity's greatest civilizations. Long before the names of Uruk, Ur, or Eridu echoed across the plains of Mesopotamia, the land was home to people whose names have been forgotten by history. They left behind no written records, no stories carved into stone, and no kings whose deeds could be remembered. Yet without these early communities, the Sumerian civilization might never have existed. Around 7,000 years ago, southern Mesopotamia looked very different from the landscape we imagine today. The mighty Tigris and Euphrates rivers constantly shifted their courses, creating vast marshlands, fertile floodplains, and rich wetlands filled with fish, birds, and wildlife. Seasonal floods deposited fresh layers of fertile soil, making the region one of the most productive places in the ancient world. While the environment could be unpredictable, it also offered remarkable opportunities for those willing to adapt. The people who settled here belonged to what archaeologists now call the Ubaid culture. Rather than a single kingdom or empire, the Ubaid was a network of farming communities that gradually spread across southern Mesopotamia between approximately 6,500 and 3,800 BCE. Although they lived thousands of years before the first Sumerian cities, many of the foundations of civilization were already beginning to take shape. Life in an Ubaid village was peaceful but demanding. Families cultivated barley and wheat, tended herds of sheep and goats, and learned to manage the seasonal floods through simple irrigation canals. These canals allowed water to reach fields even when rainfall was scarce, making agriculture more reliable than ever before. As harvests became more successful, villages slowly grew larger and populations increased. Their homes were built from sun-dried mud bricks using materials gathered from the surrounding landscape. The houses were surprisingly well planned, often containing several rooms arranged around a central courtyard where daily life unfolded. Children played in the shade, meals were prepared over open fires, and families carried out the ordinary routines that would one day support extraordinary achievements. The Ubaid people were also skilled craftsmen. They produced elegant painted pottery, carefully shaped stone tools, woven textiles, and decorative ornaments that reveal both practical skill and artistic expression. Trade gradually connected distant communities, allowing valuable materials such as obsidian, copper, and precious stones to travel hundreds of kilometers across the ancient Near East. Even at this early stage, no village was entirely isolated. Perhaps the most important buildings in these settlements were not homes, but temples. Raised upon platforms above the surrounding land, these structures served as religious, social, and economic centers for the community. Here, ceremonies honored the gods, believed to control the rivers, the harvests, and the forces of nature. The temples also helped organize labor, distribute food, and coordinate large communal projects. Long before kings ruled great cities, these early institutions were already bringing people together under shared beliefs and responsibilities. For many years, scholars believed that the rise of the Sumerians marked a sudden break with the past. Today, archaeology tells a different story. Excavations reveal that many early Sumerian cities were built directly upon older Ubaid settlements. Layer upon layer of buried villages lies beneath the foundations of later civilizations, suggesting a gradual process of growth rather than an unexpected appearance. This discovery changes the question entirely. Instead of asking where the Sumerians suddenly came from, historians increasingly ask how thousands of years of quiet innovation slowly transformed small farming villages into the world's first true cities. The story of civilization, it seems, did not begin with an empire. It began with ordinary people planting seeds, digging canals, building homes, and passing their knowledge from one generation to the next. Their names may have been lost, but their legacy became the foundation upon which the Sumerians would build one of history's greatest civilizations. As the centuries passed, these villages continued to grow. Populations expanded, trade networks reached farther than ever before, and new ideas spread from one settlement to another, slowly, almost unnoticed. The stage was being set for a transformation that would forever change human history. In our next chapter, we will witness that transformation as the first true cities rise from the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, giving birth to a new way of life unlike anything the world had ever seen. For thousands of years, the villages of southern Mesopotamia had grown slowly and steadily. Generation after generation improved farming techniques, expanded irrigation canals, and strengthened the connections between neighboring communities. What had once been scattered settlements were gradually becoming something entirely new. Around 4000 BCE, this quiet transformation accelerated, giving birth to one of the greatest revolutions in human history, the rise of the world's first true cities. Among these early urban centers, one city stood above all others. Its name was Uruk. Located in the fertile plains of southern Mesopotamia, Uruk began as a modest settlement, but over the centuries it expanded into a thriving metropolis unlike anything the world had ever seen. At its height, it may have been home to more than 40,000 people, making it one of the largest cities on Earth at the time. From a distance, travelers would have first seen the city's enormous mud brick walls rising above the flat landscape. Inside those walls stretched a maze of narrow streets, busy workshops, crowded marketplaces, and neighborhoods filled with families from many different professions. Farmers arrived with grain, fishermen carried fresh catches from the rivers, potters shaped clay into elegant vessels, and merchants traded goods brought from lands hundreds of kilometers away. At the heart of the city stood magnificent temples dedicated to the gods. Towering above the surrounding buildings were the first great ziggurats, massive stepped structures that symbolized the connection between heaven and earth. These temples were not only places of worship, they served as economic centers, storehouses, schools, and administrative offices where priests organized labor, managed food supplies, and supervised large construction projects. In many ways, the temple was the beating heart of the city. As the population continued to grow, life became increasingly complex. Keeping track of harvests, trade, taxes, livestock, and workers required a level of organization that had never before existed. Memory alone was no longer enough. The expanding city demanded new ways of recording information, making decisions, and coordinating thousands of people working toward common goals. This growing complexity encouraged specialization. Not everyone needed to produce food anymore. Some people became full-time craftsmen, metalworkers, builders, merchants, priests, or administrators. Each profession depended on the work of others, creating an interconnected society where cooperation became essential for survival and prosperity. Cities transformed strangers into neighbors and individual skills into shared achievements. Trade also expanded far beyond Mesopotamia itself. Boats traveled along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, carrying grain, textiles, and pottery, while caravans crossed deserts and mountains in search of timber, copper, precious stones, and other valuable resources unavailable in the southern plains. These trade routes connected distant cultures, allowing ideas, technologies, and innovations to spread across the ancient Near East. With prosperity came new challenges. Larger populations required stronger leadership, more organized laws, and better systems for distributing resources. Competition between neighboring cities sometimes led to cooperation, but it could also lead to rivalry and conflict. Each city sought to protect its people, expand its influence, and honor its own patron deity through increasingly ambitious construction projects. For archaeologists, the rise of cities marks one of the most important turning points in human history. Before cities, most people lived in small communities where everyone knew one another. After cities emerged, thousands of unrelated individuals learned to live, work, trade, and govern together within the same urban landscape. It was a completely new way of organizing human society. Yet one enormous challenge still remained. A city of tens of thousands of people could not rely solely on memory to manage its daily affairs. Every shipment of grain, every herd of livestock, every trade agreement, and every temple offering needed to be counted and recorded with accuracy. Without a reliable system for preserving information, even the greatest city could quickly fall into disorder. The solution to this challenge would become one of humanity's most extraordinary inventions. In the bustling temples and administrative buildings of cities like Uruk, a simple method of keeping records would gradually evolve into something that would forever change the course of history. In our next chapter, we will discover how the first writing system was born and how a handful of marks pressed into soft clay transformed the way human beings remembered, communicated, and built civilization itself. As the great cities of southern Mesopotamia continued to grow, so did the challenges of governing them. Temples received thousands of offerings, warehouses stored enormous quantities of grain, merchants exchanged goods across vast distances, and workers labored on projects that required careful planning. Remembering every transaction by memory alone had become impossible. Civilization needed a new way to preserve information. At first, the solution was remarkably simple. Small clay tokens were used to represent everyday items, such as sheep, jars of oil, baskets of grain, or pieces of cloth. These tokens helped administrators count and organize resources without relying entirely on memory. Over time, however, even this system became too limited for an increasingly complex society. Around 3400 BCE, something extraordinary began to happen in the city of Uruk. Instead of carrying clay tokens, administrators started pressing symbols directly into soft clay tablets. At first, these marks were little more than simple pictures representing objects or quantities. But generation after generation, the symbols became more organized, more abstract, and far more powerful. Without realizing it, humanity had begun to invent writing. The earliest tablets were surprisingly practical. They did not record myths, poems, or heroic adventures. Instead, they listed grain deliveries, livestock, workers' rations, and trade accounts. Writing was born not as a tool for storytelling, but as a solution to the everyday problems of managing an increasingly sophisticated society. The people responsible for these records became the world's first scribes. Their profession required years of education and discipline. Young students practiced pressing wedge-shaped marks into wet clay using sharpened reeds, repeating the same symbols countless times until they mastered the complex system. These schools would become some of the earliest centers of formal education in human history. Over the centuries, the writing system evolved into what we now call cuneiform. The name comes from the Latin word for wedge, describing the distinctive triangular impressions left by the reed stylus. Thousands of different signs could represent objects, sounds, ideas, and eventually entire words. What began as a simple accounting system gradually developed into one of the most sophisticated writing systems of the ancient world. With writing came an entirely new relationship with knowledge. Information no longer depended solely on human memory. Laws could be preserved, agreements could be recorded, religious rituals could be copied accurately, scientific observations could accumulate across generations. For the first time in history, ideas could outlive the people who created them. Yet one mystery continues to puzzle scholars even today. The language recorded on these clay tablets, Sumerian, does not appear to belong to any known language family. Unlike Akkadian, Egyptian, or later Indo-European languages, Sumerian has no clearly identifiable linguistic relatives. It stands alone, isolated from every other major language that historians have been able to study. This unusual characteristic has inspired countless theories. Some have suggested that the Sumerians migrated from a distant and unknown homeland whose language disappeared long ago. Others believe Sumerian may simply represent the last surviving member of a once much larger family of languages now completely lost to history. There are also more imaginative claims proposing extraordinary origins, but none have been supported by convincing archaeological or linguistic evidence. Most linguists agree that a language can survive even after all of its closest relatives have vanished. Throughout history, countless languages have disappeared without leaving written records behind. It is entirely possible that Sumerian once had linguistic cousins that were gradually replaced or forgotten over thousands of years. Although its origins remain uncertain, the influence of Sumerian is undeniable. For centuries, it served as the language of religion, administration, literature, and scholarship across Mesopotamia. Even after people gradually stopped speaking it in daily life, scribes continued to study and copy Sumerian texts, much as medieval scholars later studied Latin. Today, thousands of clay tablets allow archaeologists to hear voices from more than 5,000 years ago. Through these remarkable records, we can read royal inscriptions, business accounts, legal contracts, hymns, prayers, scientific observations, and some of humanity's oldest works of literature. The invention of writing did far more than preserve information. It allowed an ancient civilization to speak directly to the modern world. But writing was only one of many extraordinary achievements that emerged in Sumer. Behind every tablet lay a society developing new ideas about mathematics, astronomy, engineering, government, and religion. In our next chapter, we will explore the remarkable knowledge of the Sumerians and ask whether their achievements truly appeared suddenly or whether they were the result of thousands of years of patient human innovation. Chapter 5. Who were the Sumerians? By the time writing began to appear on clay tablets, the Sumerians had already built remarkable cities and created one of the world's most sophisticated societies. Yet despite everything they left behind, their temples, their laws, their literature, and thousands of written records, one question has never been fully answered. Who were the Sumerians, and where did they come from? At first glance, the answer might seem obvious. Since the Sumerians lived in southern Mesopotamia, it would be natural to assume that they had always lived there. For many years, some historians believed exactly that. According to this view, the Sumerians were simply the descendants of the farming communities that had gradually developed in the region over thousands of years. Civilization, in this interpretation, was not the result of a sudden arrival, but of slow and continuous cultural evolution. Archaeological discoveries provide strong support for this idea. Beneath many Sumerian cities lie the remains of older Ubaid settlements. The styles of pottery, architecture, irrigation systems, and religious buildings show gradual development rather than abrupt change. Instead of evidence for a large invading population, archaeologists often find continuity from one generation to the next. In many ways, the cities of the Sumerians appear to have grown naturally from the villages that came before them. Yet not every piece of evidence fits so neatly. One of the greatest mysteries is the Sumerian language itself. Unlike the languages spoken by neighboring peoples, Sumerian has no known linguistic relatives. It is considered a language isolate, meaning that it cannot be confidently connected to any existing language family. This unusual fact has encouraged generations of scholars to wonder whether the Sumerians may have migrated from somewhere beyond Mesopotamia. If they did come from elsewhere, where might that place have been? Over the years, several possibilities have been proposed. Some researchers have suggested the mountains to the east, where early communities had long practiced agriculture. Others have pointed toward regions near the Persian Gulf, arguing that rising sea levels after the last ice age may have submerged ancient coastal settlements whose inhabitants later moved inland. Still others have looked farther north, proposing gradual migrations over many centuries rather than a single dramatic journey. So far, however, no archaeological discovery has provided definitive proof for any of these migration theories. No forgotten homeland has been identified, and no trail of settlements clearly traces the movement of an entire people into southern Mesopotamia. Instead, the evidence suggests a far more complex picture involving centuries of cultural exchange, trade, intermarriage, and gradual population movement across the ancient Near East. Modern genetic research has added another important piece to the puzzle. Although ancient DNA from southern Mesopotamia is limited because of the region's climate, available studies indicate that the people living there shared ancestry with other populations throughout the broader Fertile Crescent. Rather than representing a completely separate or mysterious group, the inhabitants of Sumer appear to have been closely connected to neighboring communities through thousands of years of interaction. This growing body of evidence has changed the way many historians think about the origins of the Sumerians. Instead of searching for a single place where the Sumerians suddenly appeared, researchers increasingly view their civilization as the product of many different peoples, traditions, and ideas gradually coming together over countless generations. In this sense, the Sumerians may not have been newcomers at all. They may have been the descendants of the very communities that had been transforming the landscape of Mesopotamia since the days of the Ubaid culture. Of course, this does not mean that every mystery has been solved. History is rarely complete. Rivers change course, cities are buried beneath layers of mud, and countless human stories disappear forever. Archaeologists continue to uncover new sites every year, and each discovery has the potential to reshape our understanding of the ancient world. Perhaps the most honest answer is also the most fascinating. The Sumerians were neither a civilization that appeared overnight, nor a people whose origins can be explained by a single theory. They were the result of thousands of years of adaptation, innovation, cooperation, and cultural exchange. Like the rivers that sustain their cities, their history was formed by many different streams flowing together into one extraordinary civilization. As we move forward, another question begins to emerge. If the Sumerians were the heirs to thousands of years of human experience, how did they achieve such extraordinary advances in mathematics, astronomy, engineering, and government? In our next chapter, we will explore the remarkable knowledge of the Sumerians and discover why their achievements continue to inspire admiration and curiosity. More than 5,000 years later. Chapter 6. The mystery of their knowledge. By the time the Sumerian cities reached their height, they had achieved something that no civilization before them had accomplished. They had transformed scattered farming communities into organized urban societies capable of supporting tens of thousands of people. But perhaps even more remarkable than the cities themselves was the knowledge that made such a transformation possible. To later civilizations, the achievements of the Sumerians seemed almost unbelievable. They developed systems of mathematics, astronomy, engineering, administration, and law at a time when much of the world still lived in small villages. It is no surprise that some people have wondered whether such knowledge appeared too suddenly to be explained by ordinary human history. One of their greatest contributions was mathematics. Unlike the decimal system most of us use today, based on the number 10, the Sumerians developed a numerical system based on 60. At first, this may seem like an unusual choice, yet the number 60 can be divided evenly by many smaller numbers, making calculations involving fractions far more practical. Thousands of years later, we still measure an hour as 60 minutes and a minute as 60 seconds, preserving a mathematical tradition that began in ancient Mesopotamia. The Sumerians also became careful observers of the night sky. Long before telescopes existed, priests watched the movements of the sun, the moon, and the visible planets with remarkable patience. Their observations helped predict the changing seasons, organize agricultural activities, and determine the dates of important religious ceremonies. Although their understanding of the universe was very different from modern astronomy, their commitment to systematic observation laid important foundations for future scientific inquiry. Engineering was equally essential to their success. Southern Mesopotamia received relatively little rainfall, making agriculture dependent upon the careful management of river water. The Sumerians constructed extensive irrigation canals, reservoirs, embankments, and drainage systems that allowed crops to flourish across the fertile plains. These projects required planning, cooperation, and thousands of workers acting together toward a common goal. Without this engineering knowledge, the great cities could never have survived. Architecture also reached impressive levels of sophistication. Massive temples and ziggurats were built almost entirely from sun-dried mud bricks, carefully arranged to support structures that dominated the landscape. Although few of these buildings remain standing today, archaeological excavations reveal the remarkable skill with which ancient builders designed foundations, walls, stairways, and ceremonial spaces capable of enduring for centuries. The organization of government became another defining achievement. Managing growing populations required systems for collecting taxes, distributing food, resolving disputes, organizing labor, and maintaining public order. Scribes carefully recorded economic transactions, while officials supervised trade, construction, and agricultural production. In many ways, the administrative practices first developed in Sumer became models for later civilizations throughout the ancient world. Religion shaped nearly every aspect of daily life. The gods were believed to influence harvests, floods, weather, health, and the fate of entire cities. Temples served not only as places of worship, but also as economic institutions, educational centers, and administrative headquarters. Far from existing separately from society, religion was deeply woven into the political and economic life of every Sumerian city. Because these accomplishments were so advanced for their time, modern myths have sometimes exaggerated them even further. Popular books occasionally describe the Sumerians as possessing impossible scientific knowledge far beyond that of other ancient peoples. Some claim they understood distant planets, advanced physics, or technologies that could not have existed thousands of years ago. When historians examine the original clay tablets, however, a different picture emerges. The Sumerians were undoubtedly brilliant observers, gifted engineers, and highly organized administrators, but their achievements can be understood through centuries of careful experimentation, accumulated experience, and continuous learning. Their knowledge was extraordinary, not because it appeared by magic, but because generation after generation patiently improved upon the discoveries of those who came before. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson their civilization offers us. Human progress rarely happens through sudden miracles. More often, it grows quietly over hundreds or even thousands of years as ordinary people solve practical problems, share ideas, teach their children, and build upon the wisdom of earlier generations. Even so, one part of Sumerian civilization continues to inspire endless fascination. Their stories of powerful gods, heavenly realms, and mysterious beings have captured imaginations for centuries. Some readers see them as religious symbolism. Others believe they contain hidden memories of forgotten events. In our next chapter, we will step into the world of Sumerian mythology and explore the legends of the gods who were believed to rule the first great cities of humanity. As the cities of Sumer grew larger and more prosperous, the people believed that their success depended not only on human effort, but also on the will of powerful gods. Every harvest, every flood, every victory, and every disaster was thought to reflect the decisions of divine beings who watched over the world from the heavens. To understand the Sumerians, we must also understand the gods they worshipped. Unlike many later religions that centered on a single deity, the Sumerians believed in a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses, each responsible for different parts of the universe. The heavens, the earth, the rivers, the winds, the stars, fertility, wisdom, love, and war were all believed to be governed by powerful supernatural beings whose actions shaped the lives of humanity. Among the highest of these deities was An, the god of the heavens, who was regarded as the supreme authority of the divine world. Although he rarely appeared in myths as an active figure, he was believed to grant power and legitimacy to both gods and kings. Beneath him stood Enlil, the god of wind and storms, who was often described as the ruler of destiny and one of the most influential gods in the Sumerian pantheon. Another central figure was Enki, the god of wisdom, fresh water, craftsmanship, and knowledge. According to many myths, Enki was both clever and compassionate, frequently helping humanity through his intelligence rather than his strength. He was credited with teaching people practical skills, protecting civilization, and preserving order during times of crisis. No less important was Inanna, one of the most fascinating figures in ancient mythology. She was the goddess of love, fertility, beauty, political power, and war, a combination that reflected the complexity of human nature itself. Her myths tell stories of ambition, courage, sacrifice, and transformation. Thousands of years later, many scholars still consider Inanna one of the most richly developed characters in the literature of the ancient world. To the Sumerians, these gods were not distant beings existing beyond human concerns. They were believed to be deeply involved in everyday life. Temples were built as sacred homes where the gods could dwell among their people. Priests performed daily rituals, presented offerings of food and drink, and maintained elaborate ceremonies intended to preserve harmony between humanity and the divine. One of the most famous Sumerian stories describes the creation of humanity. In several ancient texts, the gods create human beings to assist with the work of maintaining the world. Rather than portraying humans as rulers of nature, these myths often present them as caretakers responsible for supporting both society and the temples dedicated to the gods. Although different versions of the story exist, they all reflect the belief that humanity occupied a meaningful place within a carefully ordered universe. The Sumerians also told stories of a great flood that destroyed much of humanity. In these accounts, a righteous man receives advance warning from a god and builds a large boat to survive the coming disaster. After the floodwaters recede, life begins again. Centuries later, similar flood narratives would appear in other cultures throughout the ancient Near East, becoming some of the most enduring stories in human history. Because these myths contain descriptions of beings descending from the heavens, some modern writers have interpreted them in unexpected ways. During the 20th century, popular books began suggesting that the Sumerian gods were not symbolic or religious figures at all, but visitors from another world. These ideas often focused on a group known as the Anunnaki, claiming they were advanced extraterrestrial beings who brought civilization to Earth. These interpretations have become extremely popular in documentaries, television programs, novels, and online discussions. Yet when historians translate the original Sumerian tablets, they find something quite different. In the ancient texts, the Anunnaki are consistently described as divine beings within the Sumerian religious tradition. not as travelers from distant planets. The extraordinary claims found in modern popular culture are largely based on interpretations that extend far beyond what the original writings actually say. This distinction is important because the genuine mythology of Sumer is already remarkable without adding ideas that the ancient authors themselves never described. Their stories reveal how the Sumerians understood nature, justice, kingship, life, and death. They provide a window into the beliefs of one of humanity's earliest civilizations and remind us that myths often express profound truths about human experience, even when they are not intended as literal history. The gods of Sumer may belong to the distant past, but the questions they inspired continue to fascinate people today. Were these stories purely symbolic? Did they preserve memories of real historical events transformed by generations of storytelling? Or did later cultures simply reinterpret ancient traditions in new ways? These questions remain open to discussion, but careful study always begins with the original evidence. In our next chapter, we will examine one of the most controversial ideas ever connected to the Sumerians, the ancient astronaut theory. We will explore where these extraordinary claims originated, why they became so popular, and what archaeology and modern scholarship actually tell us about one of history's greatest mysteries. Few ideas connected to the Sumerians have captured the public imagination as powerfully as the ancient astronaut theory. According to this popular hypothesis, humanity's earliest civilizations did not develop entirely on their own. Instead, they were supposedly guided or even created by highly advanced visitors from another world. Among all ancient cultures, the Sumerians are often placed at the center of this extraordinary claim. The theory became especially well known during the second half of the 20th century through a number of best-selling books and television documentaries. Their authors argued that ancient myths should not be read as symbolic stories, but as historical accounts describing real encounters with technologically advanced beings. In this interpretation, the gods of ancient civilizations were not divine at all. They were extraterrestrials whose advanced knowledge appeared miraculous to the people of the time. Many of these ideas focused on the Anunnaki, a group of deities frequently mentioned in Sumerian literature. According to the ancient astronaut theory, the Anunnaki were not gods, but visitors from a distant planet who came to Earth thousands of years ago. Some versions of the story claim that they genetically engineered human beings to serve as workers, while others suggest they shared advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, engineering, and civilization itself. These dramatic claims have inspired countless books, films, television series, and internet discussions. Their popularity is easy to understand. They offer mysterious explanations for the sudden rise of civilization and transform ancient history into a story filled with cosmic visitors and hidden secrets. For many people, the theory is both fascinating and entertaining. Yet history is not determined by popularity. It is determined by evidence. When archaeologists and Assyriologists study the original Sumerian clay tablets, they find no clear description of extraterrestrial visitors. The Anunnaki are consistently presented as supernatural deities within the religious beliefs of the Sumerians. Like the gods of many other ancient cultures, they represent forces of nature, divine authority, justice, creation, and the relationship between humanity and the sacred world. The texts do not describe spaceships, advanced technology, or civilizations from distant planets. Much of the modern interpretation can be traced to selective translations, speculative conclusions, and ideas added long after the original texts were written. In many cases, symbolic language has been interpreted literally, while complex religious stories have been presented as historical reports. Professional scholars generally reject these interpretations because they are not supported by linguistic analysis, archaeology, or historical evidence. This does not mean that the Sumerians were any less remarkable. On the contrary, their genuine achievements are extraordinary, precisely because they were accomplished by human beings. Over thousands of years, farmers improved agriculture, engineers built irrigation systems, craftsmen perfected new technologies, scribes developed writing, and communities gradually created one of the world's first urban civilizations. Their success becomes even more impressive when understood as the result of human creativity and perseverance. It is also important to remember that ancient people often explained the world through mythology. Before the development of modern science, floods, storms, eclipses, droughts, and other natural events were commonly understood as expressions of divine power. This pattern can be found not only in Sumer, but in civilizations across Egypt, Greece, India, China, Mesoamerica, and countless other cultures. Mythology was a way of understanding the universe, not a scientific record of historical events. None of this prevents us from appreciating the mystery that ancient stories continue to inspire. Myths often contain symbolic wisdom, moral lessons, and reflections on the deepest questions of human existence. They reveal how people understood life, death, nature, and their place in the cosmos. Their value does not depend on whether every story happened exactly as it was told. Perhaps the enduring popularity of the ancient astronaut theory tells us something important, not about the Sumerians, but about ourselves. Human beings have always been drawn to mysteries. We naturally search for extraordinary explanations when confronted with extraordinary achievements. Sometimes, the unknown invites imagination just as much as it invites investigation. For historians, however, curiosity must always be balanced by careful evidence. Every clay tablet, every buried temple, every fragment of pottery, and every archaeological discovery adds another small piece to a puzzle that is still being assembled. The story of the Sumerians is far from complete, but each new discovery brings us closer to understanding the remarkable people who laid the foundations of civilization. In our next chapter, we will leave behind speculation and return to the discoveries made beneath the sands of Mesopotamia. Through archaeology, excavation, and modern scientific research, we will explore what the evidence truly reveals about the origins and development of the world's first great civilization. For more than 2 centuries, archaeologists have carefully uncovered the buried cities of ancient Mesopotamia, one layer of earth at a time. Every excavation has added another piece to the story of the Sumerians. Unlike legends or speculation, archaeology relies upon physical evidence: broken pottery, clay tablets, building foundations, tools, bones, seeds, and countless everyday objects left behind by people who lived more than 5,000 years ago. Many of the greatest discoveries began during the 19th century, when explorers first identified the enormous mounds scattered across modern Iraq. At first glance, These hills appeared to be natural formations. In reality, they were tells, artificial hills created as generations built new cities directly on top of older ones. Every abandoned house, collapsed wall, and ruined temple became the foundation for another settlement above it. Over thousands of years, entire cities disappeared beneath their own history. As archaeologists dug deeper into these ancient mounds, they uncovered remarkable evidence of continuous human occupation. Beneath the great Sumerian cities lay older Ubaid villages, and beneath some of those settlements were traces of even earlier communities. Rather than revealing a civilization that appeared suddenly, the archaeological record showed thousands of years of gradual development. Each generation inherited the knowledge of the previous one, adding small improvements that slowly transformed village life into urban civilization. Among the most extraordinary discoveries were the thousands of clay tablets preserved beneath the dry soil of Mesopotamia. Because they had been baked by the sun and sometimes by accidental fires, they survived for millennia. These tablets contain administrative records, legal agreements, letters, religious hymns, school exercises, mathematical calculations, astronomical observations, and some of humanity's earliest works of literature. Together, they allow historians to reconstruct daily life with remarkable detail. Archaeology has also revealed the impressive scale of Sumerian engineering. Excavations have uncovered vast irrigation canals, carefully planned streets, defensive walls, monumental temples, workshops, warehouses, and residential neighborhoods. These discoveries demonstrate that Sumerian cities were not built through sudden inspiration, but through careful planning, skilled labor, and generations of continuous construction. Scientific techniques have transformed archaeology even further. Radiocarbon dating allows researchers to estimate the age of organic materials with increasing accuracy. Microscopic analysis of ancient plant remains reveals what people cultivated and ate. Chemical studies identify the origins of metals, stones, and pottery, helping historians trace trade routes that connected distant civilizations. Satellite imagery and remote sensing now reveal buried canals, roads, and settlements long before excavation even begins. One question that continues to receive attention is whether modern genetics can explain the origins of the Sumerians. Recovering ancient DNA from southern Mesopotamia is extremely difficult because the region's hot climate rapidly breaks down genetic material. Even so, the limited evidence currently available suggests that the people of Sumer shared ancestry with other populations across the Fertile Crescent. Rather than pointing toward an isolated or mysterious population, the findings support the idea of long-term interaction among neighboring communities. Every year, new discoveries continue to refine our understanding of the ancient world. Entire districts of forgotten cities remain buried beneath the sands. Countless clay tablets have yet to be translated. New technologies allow archaeologists to revisit old discoveries and ask questions that earlier generations could never have imagined. Ancient history is not a finished story. It continues to evolve with every excavation. Perhaps one of archaeology's greatest lessons is that history is rarely simple. The more evidence we uncover, the more we see that civilizations grow through countless small changes rather than dramatic moments. Great achievements often rest upon ordinary lives. Farmers tending fields, builders shaping bricks, scribes recording harvests, merchants exchanging goods, and families raising children generation after generation. The Sumerians did not leave behind spaceships or impossible machines. They left cities, temples, schools, laws, canals, mathematics, literature, and writing. These achievements are no less extraordinary because they were created by human hands. In many ways, they are even more remarkable. As we approach the end of our journey, one final question remains. Did the Sumerians truly appear suddenly, as they sometimes seem to in history books? Or has archaeology revealed a much deeper and more gradual story? In our next chapter, we will bring together everything we have discovered and reconsider one of history's oldest mysteries from a new perspective. As we reach the end of our journey, we return to the question that began this story. Did the Sumerians truly appear suddenly, or has history simply hidden the thousands of years that came before them? At first glance, their rise seems almost impossible. Great cities appeared, writing was invented, governments became organized, and remarkable advances in mathematics, engineering, and trade transformed human society. For generations, it seemed as though an entire civilization had emerged almost overnight. But archaeology tells a different story. Beneath the great cities of Sumer lie older villages. Beneath those villages are even earlier settlements. Layer by layer, archaeologists have uncovered evidence that civilization did not begin with a single dramatic event. Instead, it grew slowly through countless generations of farmers, builders, craftsmen, traders, and priests, each adding a small piece to a much larger story. The achievements of the Sumerians were extraordinary, but they were not miracles. They were the result of thousands of years of observation, experimentation, cooperation, and human ingenuity. Every irrigation canal, every temple, every clay tablet, and every new idea became another step toward the world's first great civilization. Of course, not every mystery has been solved. We still do not know every detail of where the Sumerians came from, and their unique language continues to puzzle linguists today. New archaeological discoveries may one day answer questions that remain unsolved. Perhaps that is what makes the Sumerians so fascinating. The more we learn about them, the more we realize that history is rarely a story of sudden beginnings. It is a story of patience, gradual change, and generations of ordinary people whose quiet efforts shape the future in extraordinary ways. The evidence suggests that the Sumerians did not suddenly appear. Rather, they were the visible result of thousands of years of human progress hidden beneath the sands of Mesopotamia. Their cities may have risen above the horizon, but their roots stretch deep into a forgotten past. And with that, our journey through the mystery of the Sumerians comes to an end. Thank you for joining me as we explored one of history's greatest civilizations. Until our next journey into the ancient world, may curiosity continue to guide your imagination, and may history always remind us that the greatest mysteries are often hidden in the quietest places.